Welcome to This Week in Impact, where we bring you some of the most interesting impact investing and sustainable finance stories of the week. It's Thursday, November 14th. I'm Brian Walsh, and I'm joined this week by ImpactAlpha's editor, David Bank. We'll discuss, following Trump's re-election, the search is on for global climate leadership at COP29, how hospitals are partnering with community lenders to invest in the social determinants of health, and we'll look at two recent impact deals, $300 million for energy transmission and storage in India, and 11 million euros for a lithium battery recycling company in Germany. That's all coming up on This Week in Impact. Hi, David. How are you doing this week?
Well, I'm hanging in there, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing well. And you know what? I'm actually looking forward to the upcoming Agents of Impact call that we have this coming Monday, November 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. I know that the plan is there to kind of consider the new realities, the new narratives that are emerging following last week's election. As we wrote in the post, rather than a post-mortem, we're positioning the call as a pre-vita or pre-birth of what comes next after the U.S. election. So what and who do we have in store for the call?
Yeah, Brian, we just thought maybe it would be helpful to provide a space for people to kind of air out their feelings after the election, but also kind of their plans. And, I think the thing that's kind of settling in, a week or so out now is, the work continues and people are doing all kinds of interesting, innovative, impactful work across the landscape. And, how does that go forward and, really, continue to just sort of keep the North Star on positive impact, positive social, environmental impact, either, despite or, in light of the election results. So Anthony Buglevine, many folks know, one of the early sort of pioneers of impact investing, is going to join to sort of help frame things up. Rachel Rabashote of Addisina, but also now the co-chair of something called Freedom Economy, and they've played a very key role in providing kind of legal resources, legal defense for some of the funds that have been the subject of the counterattack, the legal attack on things like DEI or racial equity investing. And then Wilson Lester from Partners in Equity in North Carolina. And we've been kind of touting what we're calling the North Carolina model. And there's a whole set of initiatives down there that sort of together kind of represent a kind of local, place-based, very practical kind of grassroots approach to wealth building and sort of ownership economy kinds of themes. So there's others as well, and we're hoping to sort of give people a little bit of a, maybe not exactly a pep talk, but maybe just a kind of reality check. As I said, the work goes on. There's all kinds of people still in the fight, and there's all kinds of work to be done, and maybe we can play a little bit of a role in keeping folks talking to each other.
All right. Well, again, the next Agents of Impact call is Monday, November 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern. There's a link to RSVP in our show notes. But moving on, as Amy Cortese reported for us, this year's UN Climate Change Summit, COP29, which is currently underway in Baku, Azerbaijan. Climate progress is already uncertain, at best, and the future of U.S. climate leadership is again in flux. Trump's rejection of climate change and multilateralism creates an opening for other countries to step in and fill the leadership vacuum. So, David, which countries are we seeing emerge as climate leaders?
Well, as you said, the COP is meeting in Baku, Azerbaijan. And actually, Azerbaijan, along with the United Arab Emirates, which was host of last year's COP Climate Summit, and then Brazil, which is host of next year's Climate Summit, they're formed what they call a kind of troika. And there have been a whole series of kind of announcements of funding and initiatives coming out of that grouping. So it's a little bit different set of players than you might expect to be leading the climate action agenda. I guess maybe Brazil comes to mind because of their Amazon rainforest, of course. Interestingly, President Biden will be in Brazil this week as well for the G20 summit. And it's something of a swan song for him in terms of global diplomacy. The U.S. delegation in Baku may feel something similar, as you said, about the fate of sort of global climate negotiations. But most of the rest of the world is moving on, and the energy transition is kind of in full swing. One of the interesting things we're watching, of course, is the role of China, because in the recent election, of course, China got vilified in many ways, and everybody competed to see how tough they could be. But if you take a view of global climate action, they've really been largely responsible for the falling cost of solar power, the falling cost of batteries. Of course, they're a major supplier of lithium and other minerals needed in the clean energy transition. And something like a third of all renewable deployments last year were in China. So people talk about red China. We've been talking about green China. They're ahead of schedule on their own emissions reductions, even though they still, of course, burn a lot of coal. But they're electrifying their economy at a rate of about 10% a year, which is much, much faster than the rest of the world.
Now, speaking of leadership, though, we also see the emergence of women's leadership showing up in the climate change debate. Tell us about that.
Well, that's something, again, that we've been on the case of for many years. And in fact, I think if you look at the they always do a kind of group picture of the heads of state assembled at these climate summits. And it was pretty much of an old boys club. A few women, I think maybe, 6 or 8 out of the 70 or so in that picture. But behind the scenes, women are playing a very key role and obviously have a key role to play. And we had Sana Kapadia from Heading for Change, which is a kind of demonstration fund around climate plus gender, on our other podcast this week. And here's what she had to say.
I'd say my areas of focus next week are really going to be advancing this dialogue on why and how gender responsive climate finance matters. So yes, it's a nascent field of bringing this intersection together, but there's an increasing set of examples across different climate themes, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's renewables, whether it's transportation, built environment, sustainable cities, the whole gambit, where gender and climate are increasingly being seen as a way to enhance climate, gender, and social and environmental outcomes.
All right, well, what's really at stake in this COP, David, and where's the money coming?
Well, they're calling this the finance COP, and in fact, the agenda is very much about finance. As folks may remember, there's been a commitment, mostly honored in the breach, to provide about $100 billion a year from the developed world to the developing world for climate mitigation, solar and renewables and whatnot, but also climate adaptation. And we've pretty much fallen short of that, but there was a pledge made back in the early days of these COPs that by 2025, there'd be what's called a new collective quantified goal that was even higher than the $100 billion. And so one of the interesting things we're watching is that folks are talking about, going quite a bit higher to the sort of $500 billion level to really start to provide that kind of financing that's needed. And the question is, how do you get to those kind of numbers? And of course, it becomes a game of blending finance, of blending both public and private finance. So a lot of kind of interesting catalytic capital ideas emerging now to sort of leverage private capital with a bit of public capital. And we'll be watching that closely.
All right, we will indeed. But for now, let's take a quick break. When we come back, how nonprofit hospitals can partner with CDFIs to invest in the social determinants of health. David, I was surprised to learn from Ibrahim Rashid's guest post on ImpactAlpha this week that only about 20% of health outcomes stem from clinical care, while the remaining 80% are shaped by social and environmental factors. As nonprofit hospitals shift from volume-based to value-based care, a powerful opportunity has emerged to invest in what's called the social determinants of health, investing in areas such as housing, nutrition, and workforce stability. So, David, how might impact investors play a role in investing in the social determinants of health?
Yeah, well, these social determinants of health have been kind of known for a while. And, people talk about food as medicine or housing as medicine, or conversely that, social trauma, living in a very violent neighborhood is bad for your health, even more than just getting shot at the level of anxiety and asthma and things. So if you can invest at the front end of those social determinants of health, you can save a lot of money instead of the back end in the ER or in the acute care wards. And so, as part of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, nonprofit hospitals have to have what are called community benefits as part of their spending in order to maintain their tax-exempt status. And one of these kind of community benefits is investing in these kinds of social determinants of health. So what was good about Ibrahim's guest post is he sort of tried to lay out ways in which the hospitals could actually fulfill this obligation through their investment policies. Unfortunately, there's not as many as you would hope, but there are some good examples.
So what are the funds that these nonprofit hospitals have to even allocate towards these investments?
Well, as you said, they're nonprofits. I mean, some of them are quite big businesses, but they're not, set up to be, investment companies. They're set up to run hospitals. They do have cash reserves, for their own operations. Those can be placed in CDFIs, local community development financial institutions, making local loans to businesses that are serving the community. There's various ways of pooling that through things like Calvert notes and C note that let the cash holdings be diversified. Some of those things can be made more intentional. There's the ProMedica health system in Toledo, Ohio, and it partnered with LISC, which is a national CDFI, but they have a local chapter in Toledo, and they established a grocery store in a food desert. And in Vermont, NeighborWorks, which is also a CDFI, and the Rutland Regional Medical Center partnered on a Healthy Homes initiative to improve the housing quality for asthma patients. So these are kind of very bread and butter kinds of investments, but that can meet the investment needs of the hospitals, but also then obviously have community benefits, which might cause cost savings for those very hospitals.
Right. So it's not just responding to this regulation under the ACA that the hospitals must show these kind of community benefits, but also might actually help with overall health outcomes.
Yeah, and another thing I learned, which I didn't know from Ibrahim's story, is that the Community Reinvestment Act, which mostly covers banks and financial institutions, and they have an obligation to invest and lend in their local areas, that in 2016, that mandate was expanded to include health investments in their local areas. So there could be bank financing through their CRA requirements for these kind of nonprofit hospital-based local partnerships to invest in the social determinants of health. So you might have a nifty kind of conflux of players, banks, hospitals, and local lenders.
Right, and all of them working towards addressing the upstream challenges of healthcare that extend beyond just traditional clinical care.
Absolutely, and that save money for all.
Absolutely. Well, you can read Ibrahim Rashid's full guest post on ImpactAlpha.com. There's also a link in the show notes as well. For now, we'll take one more quick break. When we come back, we'll look at two recent deals we've covered on Impact Alpha, one on energy in India and the other on recycling in Germany. David, Impact Alpha regularly covers deal flow in the impact investing space. Let's discuss two deals that we covered this week. Here's the context for the first deal we're spotlighting. India's energy demand is surging. Beyond the need for more energy production is the need for energy transmission. The country will need an estimated $5.7 billion of new investment by 2027 for additional transmission capacity. So the proposed solution, $300 million for Energrid, which will bid for and develop energy transmission and battery storage projects. David, what's going on here?
Well, as you say, transmission has become one of the key bottlenecks of being able to ramp up renewables in a big way. India's on a huge kind of solar install campaign, and they need more grids. So IndiGrid, which is a publicly listed company that does energy transmission lines, has been building out big cross-country lines. And British International Investment, or BII, and Norfund, the Norwegian Climate Investment Fund, have been staking IndiGrid to building these lines. Now, what this new deal is letting IndiGrid do development financing actually for as smaller developers start to install these things, and then have essentially an option to buy them once they become operational. So it's stocking the pipeline of transmission projects in India where they basically can't build them fast enough.
So next up on our deal flow spotlight, the challenge: global demand for lithium-ion batteries, and other industrial uses is expected to quadruple by 2030. In Europe, which gets virtually all of its lithium from China, folks are looking to diversify. So this week we reported on 11 million euros raised for Tozero, a German-based firm, in their Series A. David, what's their approach?
Well, as you say, battery recycling is becoming a big deal, and particularly in Europe and the US, as they try to diversify their supply chains away from China, which has a lot of the raw materials. And so there was a huge deal several years ago for Redwood Materials, which is a battery recycler founded by a former Tesla co-founder, and they put $1 billion into that in Nevada. But there's a lot of smaller battery recycling operations getting started up as well, and with a variety of different technologies. This one, Tozero, has what's called hydrometallurgy, which is done underwater, and that somehow reduces the carbon emissions. So there are different technologies at stake. But one thing that's interesting is that the price of lithium has fallen in recent months as kind of EV take-up has slowed and demand has slowed, and also I think as global supplies have increased. So this is sort of a little bit of an outlier. The big deals that we were talking about, in late 2022 or so, when this was all very frothy. But there will be a long ramp towards EVs and towards batteries needed for all sorts of things. And getting the lithium out of existing batteries is actually cheaper and cleaner than mining it out of the ground. So battery recycling is going to be a big deal, certainly when this current wave of EVs run their useful life.
Well, you can read more on these two deals and catch up on many other Impact deals on ImpactAlpha.com. But for now, that's going to do it for This Week in Impact. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Brian. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
The pleasure is all mine. And thank you all for listening. This Week in Impact is a production of Impact Alpha and part of the Impact Alpha podcast network. Smart conversations by and for impact investing professionals. For more exclusive stories about the world of impact investing and sustainable finance, join thousands of other agents of impact by subscribing. Just go to impactalpha.com/subscribe for full access. If you like the show, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and be sure to leave us a 5-star rating. It really helps other people discover the show. Thanks, as always, to our producer extraordinaire, Isaac Silk. For David Bank, I'm Brian Walsh, and we'll see you next week for more Impact.